The lighting approach was always affected by the story, the mood of the scene, the way Alan wanted to play it. If it was a strong, stark situation, then I would go more bold with a backlight or a cross light, but always the simplest approach. For a lot of the interiors, we'd be working at very low light levels, so the fast stock, fast lenses, plus the fact we were working with anamorphic, meant that I needed that fast film stock to get the quality out of those lenses. We were teetering on the edge very often.
The swimming pool scene is a classic example of, it was a beautiful drawing that Gerald Scarfe had done, which was just a sort of crucifix position of a man lying in a swimming pool. And I always remember Roger, Jerry Scarfe dipped his brush in red and just went like that and put a red blob on it, and suddenly it came alive and there was the blood. And I was trying to match that really, and cinematically that was very difficult because you can't, that's just one frame. So it's, I think I'd just seen Napoleon, Abel Gance's film, so I always wanted to use the pendulum. So we made a pendulum and we put the camera on the end of it.
The swinging pendulum effect was something of a surprise to me. Alan came up with it, as we were always having to invent as we went along. We'd been very busy on the interiors and we were succeeding well. And Alan one morning came up with this idea that we've got to move the camera over the pool. And I didn't know where his idea came from. He must have had a reference somewhere, perhaps. And so we ended up building this rig very quickly.
Many of the locations were depicted as to, the working class house, by the canal. We had to recreate an American stadium, so we went to Wembley, the football stadium, and did it at the back of the Wembley football stadium. We had to recreate the Second World War, and we went down to Barnstable, which had wonderful sand dunes, and we put up barrage balloons and tanks and a lot of explosions.
The tunnel scene where young Pink puts the bullet on the railway line, we were up against the wall. We were out in the countryside. We didn't have generators or lighting. We were miles from any tarmac road surface. So we decided to shoot stylistically and strongly with what we had. And you'll remember from the scene, we were inside the tunnel and we silhouetted young Pink against the exterior, which gave this bold, stylish impression with just the natural light.
Originally in the film, we were kind of experimenting with some elements that had gone with the stage show. We experimented with giant inflatables. For instance, at the end of that tunnel originally was going to be this giant inflatable of the teacher, and we had that on the end of a crane, and of course that didn't work. What happened was, at the end of it, anything that I'd actually taken from their stage show, we tried to put into the film to begin with, but everything theatrical didn't work. So everything that's in the film was of a more realistic nature.
In the show, it was mainly Jerry's animation of the teacher, and with him as a puppet, with the wife whacking him and him whacking the kid. But in the movie, all that stuff with the maze and with the mincing machine, well, there's also an animated version of the mincing machine in the show, with the teacher putting kids in the top and, winding the handle and getting worms out at the bottom. So Jerry designed a set and they built it with a maze and with the machine, with kind of hammers and cogs and this kind of infernal machine, which I think he'd had that idea anyway for something else previously, and so, had the chance to... he'd had the idea of the school as mincing machine before. We even talked about the war. And so this gave him the opportunity to, to build it and have it filmed. And it is startling. It's quite startling. I love the conveyor belt with the desks on it.
When it came to something like a surreal set, the education sequence, for instance, I drew out very carefully in a series of drawings. I always felt that in my education I was being rammed through a maze, not knowing where I was going next or which direction I was in. I couldn't get an overall picture of it because I was down in it. Then there was a feeling of being shoved through a mincer and all these things. So all of these things fed themselves into a series of designs that I made. And it was quite frightening, really, because I remember that I did make these little tiny sketches, sometimes almost on the back of an envelope, and suddenly you'd look, and this thing would be a £100,000 set at Pinewood, this little scribble, and you think, oh, God, did I really mean that, you know?
The set and the storyline in The Maze was saying everything, so I just used a very simple graphic light source and banked up a few Dinos, enormous banks of lights, in the studio gantry. Just gave the whole thing a single backlit source with a minimal amount of fill, and really let the image work for itself.
The school I went to had some decent teachers in it, some very good teachers, but by and large they were the exceptions that proved the general rule that the school was kind of interested in maintaining order, you know, and gaining university entrances. Sort of, it was those days when a lot of grammar schools liked to pretend that they were really public schools, you know. So we played rugby, not soccer, and you know, and there was a CCF, and there was a lot of ruling by shame, really. You know, there was a lot of quite nasty, sarcastic people at the school who try and control the boys by putting them down.
I remember the morning when we did the Nazi rally. I'd asked for, I think it was 380 skinheads, and they were real skinheads. So actually keeping them under control was actually quite difficult. Before we'd even started, the choreographer had to teach them this strange kind of, you know, Nazi two-step that we wanted them to do.
We had enormous crowds, we had technical difficulties. The Royal Horticultural Hall doesn't have any of the normal facility for filming, but we liked the spear-like architecture and what the art director could do to it. We had to build enormous rigs for our lighting and to black out all the daylight, so we had studio control. We rented enormous spotlights to reflect, in a way, the rock and roll concert, but meld that with this horrific Nazi rally situation. We also had great difficulty with the crowd at times. We had real skinheads. And there was one moment that was kind of humorous, where I was taking light readings amongst all these heavy skinhead dudes in their black outfits. They were joking about throwing me over the balcony, which was semi-serious, you know. But they often got involved too much with the scene.
It was kind of hairy, particularly when we did some of the more violent scenes with these skinheads, because in the end, to them, of course, it's not an illusion, which film is. They started to think that it was real, so it's kind of difficult to control them in some of the more excessive, uglier scenes that I've filmed. And you always wonder as a film director, you know, that you might be crossing the line when you're actually getting people to do things which are not very pleasant, but actually look like good shots. So you have to control yourself there. But no, I remember the day that we did the fascist rally. It kind of went off without a hitch. Well, not too many hitches. I think a few people had a few punch-ups, but you know, no more than the average football match.